Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We would love to hear where you are chatting in from. So please do use the chat and let us know where you're coming to us from. This is the session that you have joined is called Supporting Resilience in Family Defenders, Strategies for Training, Mentoring, and Supervising Interdisciplinary Family Defense Teams. And so as you're joining us, we're interested to hear from you as much as we can in today's presentation. So let us know, what do you find challenging about supervision? What is it that you're hoping to learn from our session today? So please do let us know where you're from and what you are most hoping to get out of this dialogue today. I will let you know sort of who I am and then invite our co-presenters to introduce themselves. So my name is Caitlin Becker. I'm the Managing Director of Social Work at the Bronx Defenders. Bronx Defenders is a holistic community defender office located in the South Bronx. We provide representation to individuals in criminal legal proceedings, family defense proceedings where we represent parents in child protective proceedings. And then we have practices that focus on immigration and housing and the civil needs of our clients. And so we have these holistic defense teams where we have lawyers and social workers and advocates, investigators, and lawyers from other practice areas working on holistic defense teams to represent our clients, and in the context of today's presentation, parents who are charged in the family regulation system. And so I'll invite my co-presenters to introduce themselves. They are really the experts who are going to be talking about their experience of supervision and supporting the work that we do at Bronx Defenders representing parents. So I'll first kick it to Noemi to let us know who you are, Noemi, and what do you bring to this conversation today?
Sure. Hi. Thank you for having us and welcoming us. My name is Noemi Cotto. I am one of the social work supervisors in the family defense practice. I have been supervising now on an interdisciplinary team for 5 years. And what I hope to bring, my goal for today is to help you all think through ways to more seamlessly integrate new attorneys and non-attorney advocates into the work that you're already doing and provide some overall guidance on what has helped us in supervising on an interdisciplinary team.
Thank you, Noemi. I'll invite Nicole next to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Nicole Velasquez. I'm a supervising attorney at the Bronx Defenders. This is my second year supervising, and I specifically supervise what we call our training team, who are the brand new members of our practice, typically coming straight from law school, and so not yet admitted. So I have like a very unique role in my style of supervision, and it has been really interesting to do that first in normal times last year, and then have to shift midway through that year to doing everything virtually. So my role in today is really going to be talking about how do we supervise in COVID times when we are not face-to-face with our direct reports and when we don't have the benefit of like community space and holding that space in a way that we would typically, and in a way that is so integral to the type of work that we do to sustaining ourselves and to keeping us ready to fight. So that will be my focus today.
Thank you, Nicole. And next, I'll invite Dr. Maya Prabhu, who is not a Bronx Defenders, but I feel maybe Maya is an honorary Bronx Defenders by now, having worked with the Bronx Defenders as a consultant to our wellness work over the past couple of years. So I'll pass it to Maya.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to members of the audience for joining us. I know your time is very valuable, and for you to spend it with us is really a pleasure. I can't wait to hear your questions. My name is Maya Prabhu. I'm a forensic psychiatrist. I am an associate professor in the Division of Psychiatry at Yale in the Law and Psychiatry Division. And my collaboration with the Bronx Defenders began few years ago, as Caitlin said, thinking about wellness and safety interventions and moving into areas of psychoeducation, how to work with clients who have a serious mental illness. How do we think about setting boundaries and being supportive both of one another and of our clients? And with regard to supervision, I think these are some of the most interesting conversations and trainings that I've done at the Bronx Defenders. How do we meet our supervisees where they are, while moving them and helping them move towards where they need to be technically, whether it's legal supervision or social work supervision. And it's a very interesting, challenging process, toggling between creating an emotional safe space and focusing on work and meeting technical goals, and one that's been made harder by COVID, no doubt.
Thank you so much, Maya. And so we really hope that this is as interactive a conversation as this virtual platform allows. And so please do use the chat, use the question section as well. I am going to be mostly just facilitating the conversation, keeping an eye on the chat and elevating questions and comments to the panelists today. So again, as we are beginning our introductory remarks, please do jot in the chat, what do you find challenging about supervision, either being a supervisor or being supervised? I'm sure the audience is mixed in terms of roles. And then what are you hoping to learn? And we'll kind of keep an eye on that throughout the presentation. I just wanted to begin by reminding all of us and grounding us in the community agreements that the ABA has asked us to keep in mind during our conversation and in the chat. Listen actively and humbly, share the air, step up and step back, lean into discomfort, be aware of privilege and power, use I statements. It's okay to disagree. Recognize that intent is not the same as impact. Commit to learning, not debating. The both and rule, call people into the conversation and don't let roles limit value, respect all voices. And I would, invite us all to also be grounded in Marty's words today and be brave and be bold. And we recognize that there are lots of important voices in the space today. So thank you all for being here. I wanted to just also let you know the materials that we've provided for today's session that might be of use later on. The National Association for Public Defense has a wellness committee that's put together 10 principles for creating sustainability in public defense. And we hope that this document is of use. It is important, I think, to remember that as we're building sustainable defenders and we are doing the work of preventing burnout if we can, or helping to guard against burnout with our supervisees, that there are systemic obligations that our organizations have to do our best to create a sustainable environment for defenders, for social workers, advocates, and attorneys who represent parents and families. And so the principles in the NAPD document are mostly focused on systemic interventions and that we at Bronx Defenders are certainly working on developing and implementing, but are by no means the experts in this area. And we know we have much to learn from all of you. And so we hope that document is of use to think about ways to create a more sustainable defender office that supports people and recognizes the differential impact of being a defender in this system, recognizing that our experience and our identity matters in the work and makes a difference in how we experience the work. And so we as supervisors and managers have an obligation to recognize that and to build in the systems and support that people need to do the work for the long haul. And so I invite you to take a look at those principles at your leisure. And then secondly, we've included from the Trauma Stewardship Institute that was founded by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, who wrote a couple of books that I have found very important in my journey and of both doing this work and also supervising and managing others who are doing this work. The books are called Trauma Stewardship and The Age of Overwhelm. And she includes this tiny survival guide, recognizing that while systems work is important and critical, and we cannot ignore that systems level work, we also want to make sure that the people that we supervise, the people who are doing this work day in and day out, also have the individual interventions that they need to sustain themselves in the day-to-day, and that they have those strategies for sustaining the work. And so we invite you to also take a look at those books, and we'll include this tiny survival guide in your resources as well for your review later on. And so with that, I will turn it over to Noemi to begin our discussion on best practices for supervision.
Sure, thank you. So, one thing that I want to touch on while focusing on best practices for supervision is meeting regularly with your supervisees, right? That allows you to troubleshoot issues, but also long-term case issues and any other problems that may arise. If you have a reoccurring time each week or every other week, that's even better. Some tools that I have found helpful, is to be able to create a Google Doc, a spreadsheet, just something that you can track the cases, that you can also track an agenda, which for me in my practice and what I do is that I generally create an agenda 24 hours in advance or 48 hours, where it allows my supervisee to document any concerns, and just it allows me to prepare ahead of time. So when I'm stepping into supervision, I'm already aware of what is it that we will be discussing. Once again, also, I make a conscious effort to have a reoccurring supervision time weekly and or bi-weekly, depending on the needs. And that is a time and space that is protected, where my supervisee is going to know that we are scheduled to meet. Also, meeting regularly and having check-ins. This is where you're able to give clear, constructive feedback with examples of what you've observed. It allows new attorney and advocates a forum for issues that may come up, and allows you to kick non-urgent questions to that space as well. It allows for the advocate to inform the agenda and what is it that is most pressing for them. Also, it allows you to take notes, and thinking about scheduling a quarterly full case review, which just allows you to really go through the cases and continue to troubleshoot and discuss what are strategies and what's next, right? As much as possible, avoid supervising in the courtroom and or at child protective meetings. For social workers and parent advocates, most of our work is done out of court, and it is done at what we call our family team meetings, child safety conferences. So I would, avoid doing supervision, obviously, while a conference is taking place. Courtroom supervision can add increased stress for new advocates as well as the client. If possible, supervision should happen before the appearance, strategizing about what are the needs to be said, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, what points you will need to respond. And a quick debrief after the court appearance and or conference is useful. You can give quick tips on performance and substance, as well as briefly strategizing next steps in the case. Manage out of court, manage crisis also out of courtroom, before and after. Just once again, strategy, what works best. And just continue to debrief and provide feedback, even if it's 5 minutes after a court appearance. Part of supervision is observing the work in action when possible. For new lawyers, this is especially important, but even for experienced attorneys, it is helpful to observe what is happening in the courtroom. This is even more important when your advocate reaches out, asking for your presence at an appearance and or at a family meeting out of court. It can also be helpful to be present with an advocate when meeting with opposing counsel and or agency workers. And it allows also just for better negotiation. Setting clear expectations about your supervision is key, and also asking what style works best for your supervising. Practice tips, as you can see. Caitlin, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. You should know your own style of supervision. One thing for social workers, a lot of our training is based on process and reflection. So, I always say in my supervision, my style of supervision is process and reflection. And it's something that I also speak with my supervisors about. I inform them what my style is, but I also welcome what is their style, right? And what will best help train them and help guide in their process of professional development. Also, make the implicit explicit. You need to make expectations really clear for new attorneys and non-attorneys, advocates as well. Don't assume that everyone gets it and that everyone knows. Look for opportunities to observe your advocate in action. Offer clear communication and regular feedback. Normalize mistakes as part of the learning process, but we also have to protect our clients and provide the best representation as possible. Normalize mistakes and encourage staff to come to you when they feel they've made a mistake so you can assist in fixing it. Supervisors should do their best to project calmness, empathy, appreciation. Also, just recognizing that the work is really hard and it was challenging pre-COVID and now post-COVID, or not even post-COVID, but while in COVID, it has even become even more challenging, and also acknowledging how many are feeling overwhelmed just with life in general and the work that we do. Be kind and direct. Niceness is not the most desired quality, although it will get you very far. Please. So now I'm going to just focus on a case scenario, and Nicole and I are going to mock how we would handle the situation. It's one that comes up pretty often. And so I'll read the case scenario. Part of your role as a supervisor is supporting holistic advocacy between attorneys and non-attorney advocates. What steps would you take if a social work supervisor lets you know that one of the attorneys you supervise never makes referrals or works with non-attorney advocates? Does this stand out as an issue to you? How, why, and how would you approach the issue with the supervising? So, hey, Nicole. I just met with Debbie in supervision, and while we were, while we were meeting in supervision, she made it, she brought up some concerns that Dan doesn't really make referrals to the other advocates on the team. And, the client that they're currently working with, it has immigration issues going on, also is, has a charge in criminal and is about to face eviction. And I'm just wondering, I'm not sure what's going on, and I'm not sure if Dan even knows what the process is like, and that he can make internal referrals to the other advocates. I don't know if he's probably overwhelmed with the work, and I think it might be a good idea for us to kind of case conference and figure out a strategy and how we can best support him.
And I know you said that Debbie's working on this particular case with him. Has she been working on other cases with him and noticed that this was the case in those instances as well? I just want to get a sense of how widespread the problem is.
Yes, it seems to be an ongoing issue. And, when Debbie has asked, and also there are many last minute requests for our client has, conferences, and we're informed very last minute. Dan really is just I don't really know what I'm doing.
I'm happy to know this. This is not something that was brought to my attention before. So I think, and I think it's important that he, first of all, if he is feeling overwhelmed, that he does use the resources available to him. That's why we're operating in a holistic manner, because that's going to be what best serves our clients, but also sounds like it'll best serve Dan as well. Taking some things off of his plate. So what I think I'm going to do is, he and I are scheduled to have supervision tomorrow. Actually, we meet every Wednesday. So what I think I'll do this first time around, since it's the first time I'm hearing of it, is kind of check in with him about where he is, what his understanding is of when referrals are appropriate or not. This is something that I see is pretty common amongst new attorneys, and even more senior attorneys, honestly, because I think there's also a sense of, I don't want to overburden people. Is this a proper referral? Am I just like shifting my work onto others? When that's not the case, like that is what everyone is here for, is to collaborate and have their own different roles. So I'll try to get to the bottom of like what might be going on for him and why these referrals aren't made. And maybe we'll take a dive into his case list and see like what other cases maybe he can be making referrals on. And if you notice that it's not getting better, then maybe what we'll do then is we meet every Wednesday. And so maybe we can find a supervision time that we already have set that you and Debbie can join us in, and we can all have a conversation.
Yeah, that would be great. And we can just all be able to just case conference the case, right? And figure out like, how could we distribute the work equally? Also just that he knows that there is social work support available for him as well.
You happen to know, has Debbie had any kind of conversations around this issue with Dan directly?
She has mentioned that she's felt like uncomfortable, and also there's just like this concern of feeling like you're kind of like ratting your colleague out, and that's not the messaging that she wants to project. However, it did come up in supervision, and I told her that, the only way that we can all learn together, right, is to be able to have these conversations. And it's not necessarily that she's like ratting him out, but just trying to get a better understanding of how she can be more supportive, because just like looping her in last minute is not beneficial for the client.
So keeping that in mind, if it's okay with you, I think how I approach the conversation with Dan is actually, I think it's a good time to check in with everyone I supervise, just because like this may also be happening in other areas and I'm just not aware of it. So it's good to always have kind of that periodic check-in of like, are you making appropriate referrals? Like, let's go through the cases that you have other advocates collaborating with you, just to make sure that our clients are best served, and kind of address it overall.
Thank you, Nicole. And just know that I will have open office hours, so you're more than welcome to drop in at any time.
Sorry, Noemi and I have had to do this a few times. Could you tell?
I will say that Noemi and Nicole seem very practiced in this conversation and this approach. I'm interested to hear from the room or from the group, what kind of resonated from what Noemi has shared or from this role play and scenario that we've offered. And I'll first maybe kick it to Maya to see what, did you notice or what have you found, in your work with us that resonated?
Well, I like how you created a space to ask open-ended questions, that you didn't jump to a hypothesis or a solution. Therefore, I think the stance of being curious when someone is sort of working in a way or operating a way that isn't optimized is really critical. So be curious and be kind when you're being curious about what's going on, I think are my takeaways from that.
Well, I'll just add and elevate a couple of comments in the chat that it was really great and helpful to see this sort of played out in the way that you both did. And this helpful idea to, I will do this as part of all of my reviews to avoid that worry about ratting out. And I think that we see that quite often. And the other thing I'll just notice is what I think you see here played out is a real collaborative approach to supervision. So Nicole and Noemi see themselves as a team supervising the attorneys and advocates and social workers that they are both responsible for sort of overseeing in the course of the work. And I think that team approach to supervision is really important. Nicole or Noemi, any kind of additional thoughts that come to mind or that you wanted to share as part of this initial section?
Noemi and I like to do in real life, not just in a practice scenario, is challenge our supervisees to try kind of address the scenario that they're facing on their own first. and to empower them to do that, which is why I asked Noemi the question of like, has this been addressed with the staff person directly? And sometimes that doesn't always work. There are many reasons why like that type of feedback, direct feedback, may not be appropriate in any given situation, but that is something that we typically do like to try to encourage, just to make sure that, again, as I saw in the chat, like there's not feelings of people being ratted out, also helping to build agency in your own and empowering individuals to have their own voice in this work and to champion their own style of advocacy and what works for them, just because this won't be the only instance in which there's kind of interpersonal differences or conflict. And so working on that skill of trying to empower our direct reports to be able to build that skill set for themselves. Like I said, when it's not appropriate or it's not going to benefit both parties, we are more than willing to step in and try to be solution oriented. And I think what's more important is follow up to make sure that whatever we are choosing to do as supervisors to help correct the situation is actually working. Because if it's not, then we need to strategize around a different approach.
Maybe I'll just highlight one more piece. Both of you underscored the idea of doing this as part of your, as part of all of your reviews, and I see that idea came up in the chat. I think that sometimes supervisors who are engaged, genuinely open, have an open door policy, or in the age of COVID, and you know, make themselves very accessible, assume that because they are open and accessible, that issues are going to be brought to their attention, and therefore that canvas, that regular canvas of problems that you've seen either with that supervisee or with another supervisee, and just building it into the structure is very important, because best practices fall off by the wayside, and they certainly have during COVID. So making that check-in routine is critical for both pieces of the diet, both the supervisor and the supervisee.
Thank you all. We're going to transition to our next section with Nicole. There was a question in the chat here that I wanted to address and invite Nicole. You can answer this question from the attorney perspective, which is, what are the ratios? How many team members are supervised by one manager, and what is the caseload? So our social workers and parent advocates at Bronx Defenders, the supervisory ratio is about 1 to 4. And we try not to have one person supervise more than 4 people. Sometimes, of course, we have transitions or moments where people are on leave, and those ratios change, but that's what we try to keep it at. And our social workers and parent advocates are supervised by social worker and parent advocate supervisors. And so they're not directly supervised by lawyers, but of course do work very closely with our attorney colleagues. And so Nicole, if you want to, begin your part of the presentation, just letting the group know about those.
Yeah, no problem. So we are about the same average 1 to 4 ratio. I think there's about 60 members in our practice currently, but that I believe also includes all of our advocates as well. So I can't give you the exact number of attorneys we have, but we do have more attorneys than we do parent advocates and social workers. There are some attorneys who have 5 and 6 supervisees, and there are some who have 3. I myself have 3. And the caseload doesn't, right now, the goal is to have it not exceed 60 cases. And typically that has been where we are now. That has not always been the practice. When I started, people were carrying caseloads of close to 100. So I saw there was a mention of high caseload in one of the questions. That is something we experienced. That was kind of the status quo for many, many years. And thankfully, we have been able to hire more attorneys to alleviate the caseload significantly. By no means are filings going down, but the increase in hiring has really helped that. And if it's okay, Caitlin, I'm going to continue into my area. So, like I said, my name is Nicole. My pronouns are she and hers. I failed to mention that initially. And really what's been interesting to me in COVID has been adapting to ushering in our new team of attorneys in the time of COVID. And I just want to highlight this quote by Audre Lorde. Sometimes we are blessed with being able to choose the time and arena and the manner of our revolution, but more usually we must do battles where we are standing. And that is what we found ourselves with in COVID, right? Like nobody was prepared to do court from home. As you can see, I'm in my bedroom with my furry white chair. Yes, this is how I appear in court daily because it's authentic to me and I'm not going to change that for a judge. And I'm fortunate enough to have a space of any kind, and judges should be thankful that I can appear and participate in court. It's definitely not the ideal method. Ideally, we would be fighting in the courtroom with our clients next to us. And there's many challenges that litigating in COVID presents. And it's not just the litigation piece, it's also the piece of supervising. And as I mentioned when I first introduced myself to you all, part of what sustains us in this work is community, right? I don't think any of us enjoy doing this emotional, laborious work in silos. I think we crave community. We crave others who can relate to the experiences that we're having in court. There's no better feeling than after a really tough court appearance, being able to turn to your community and express your feelings on that situation. And that's a really critical piece that is challenging in COVID. So what are my tips to address that? So as I said, the piece that's missing in COVID is encouraging community. It is very difficult. We had 4 new attorneys join our practice this year, and they met everyone virtually in little boxes as you are meeting us today. And that's not the same, right, as if they were typically be onboarded, and then there would be like a big happy hour in our garden for them so that they can mix and mingle with all of their colleagues and get to know them. We try to create these artificial spaces. It's challenging. So my recommendations are be present. Following up on what Noemi and Maya have shared, regular check-ins are critical during this period, if only for that human contact. Maybe you don't check in every week. Maybe you don't check in every week about the cases. Maybe some weeks are reserved to how are you doing? And when you're having those check-ins, be intentional, be present. Don't be checking your phone for all of your client contact that's happening. Try to avoid checking your emails. Really try to make sure that the focus is on your supervisee for however long that is, whether it's 30 minutes, whether it's 45 minutes, whether it's an hour. Make sure that it is scheduled and that you are prepared to show up for them. Things happen, emergencies come up, acknowledge if an emergency is arising, ask for a minute. My advice is not to try to do both simultaneously because inevitably your direct report is going to feel that they don't have your attention. And that's not going to feel good to them, especially in this time when they are lacking personal access and connection. I would also say, try to have your camera on, try to do supervision in a format that allows for face-to-face contact similar to this, at least to create more humanity, more connection, so that you can see how someone is doing in real time if they allow it. I know that some people would prefer, for many reasons, to have supervision with cameras off, right? Maybe it's that they don't want you to see their living situation. Maybe it's that there are other things happening in their lives that don't allow for that. See if maybe you can schedule a time. Maybe it's not every supervision, but see if you can schedule a time for them where you invite them to appear camera on, and they can make the arrangements that work best for them to allow for that. Slow down. Take a minute. I recommend at the beginning of your check-ins with your supervisees, how are you doing? Talk about the weekend. What happened? Try to make that connection, as opposed to just thinking about what you have on your plate. We're all busy. We all definitely are thinking about the 10 things that aren't getting done in the moment that we're doing supervision. But use it as a time to really make it about the person you're supervising and not about you. And so therefore, checking in with them, an emotional check-in, however you want to do it. Hi, how are you? Maybe you have a prompt. One thing I do with my direct reports is we kind of sometimes check in on like what went well this week, what didn't go well, what are you worried about in the upcoming week, and that kind of gives us an opportunity to just like get a pulse check before we dive into things. That goes to the second point, creating in-person dynamics without being in person. As much as possible, try to create that space where you are checking in and present during supervision. you're checking in for debriefs, and you're checking in for client meetings. Usually in supervision, it will come up. I had a really difficult conversation with this client, or this client expressed frustration with me. Use that time to invite yourself into a meeting with the clients. Suggest a Zoom. That's really hard in this time too. Our clients are meeting us by phone mostly, or in video in court for the first time. I encourage with those difficult relationships for our supervisees to schedule the same way I would with them, a Zoom, a FaceTime, whatever your personal preference is for communication, to allow that face-to-face contact with the client as well, because that really matters, especially if you're dealing with the mentally ill population who may be experiencing some paranoia about this virtual world and not trusting who you are or that you are who you say you are. Those are some skills that I have found to be critical in this time. I also want to say that transparency in expectations and boundaries work in both directions. We talked about, Caitlin mentioned in the beginning, and I know this also goes back to the 150 caseload question. We need to sustain ourselves in this work. We as supervisors and we as direct reports, we as clients even, have to sustain ourselves in this work. If we do not have proper self-care, we're not going to be able to show up for our clients, for our colleagues, for our supervisees. So one thing that that was modeled for me and that I try to model is, when am I available? How can you reach me? What are the best methods of reaching me? If I set myself, during this time period after work, usually between like 5 and 7, that's my workout time and that's my dinner time with my family. So if you have anything, by all means, like, you can reach out to me. Just know that like I might answer you after 7, when like after my time. And what that models is not only that it's okay to have parameters around your accessibility, but also it highlights to your supervisees, like maybe they should think about how they can build in for themselves that turn off time from work to be able to recharge, to be able to get the mental clarity to keep going. And that's hard. That's easier said than done. In my first year, I was just like, even finding an hour for myself was like, what? I never had lunch. I ate at my desk every day while working, while doing client calls. I stopped working out. And what I noticed is like my energy was lower. It was so low. And that the only way that I was able to kind of rehab that was to force myself into an exercise routine. And I started baby steps. It was like, I'm going to do like a 15-minute night meditation, like a little yoga that I don't have to stand up. I'm sitting on my mat. And it started from there, and I built up on it. And I was I was able to build time for myself to do that. And so I kind of encourage, when I see burnout, which Maya's going to talk about a little bit more later. But when I see it, I encourage, like, what are the things that restore you? What are things you like to do on your off time? To my supervisees, and encourage them to have that time. And during that time, put your phone on do not disturb. Put your phone on silent. It's okay. Sometimes emergencies happen. 9 out of 10 times, people will be okay for that hour that you turn yourself off. If you're really worried, leave my number on your voicemail, and they can always, if it's a true emergency, have a backup person to reach out to. But set that time for yourself, and let's build on it. The other thing I want to share is problem solving and being solution oriented. Solution fell off the slide, but that's what it's supposed to say. And basically what I mean about that is that it's very easy for attorneys with high caseloads or any caseload to get bogged down in the day-to-day things that they're not doing well, that they are struggling with, that they think they could be doing better. And I think our role as supervisors is to keep the big picture in mind, to highlight, this is what you're doing well, be strengths-based. Let's talk about the things that you are doing well, because all you are seeing, and I'm hearing all you're seeing, is all of the things that you don't know how to do, feel insecure doing, think that you could be doing better. Let's talk about the things you're actually doing well. And I guarantee you that the list of things you're doing well outweighs the list of things you need to work on or that you are focusing on, Also, what's helpful is like us seeing what the picture is of their cases and looking at, okay, maybe you're feeling overwhelmed right now because this is the time in your practice where you have trials every week. So let's take a step back. How can these trials appear more manageable? You know, let's talk about deadlines and building that into your calendar so that when the time comes for trial, you're already 3/4 prepared, right? Because when you got on intake, the following day you followed up with your client. You had a full intake debrief. You got their story about what happened. You already know what witnesses you need from that. You already know what evidence you need to subpoena from that. Then, you know, a couple months in, you're at your preliminary conference. You get discovery from opposing counsel. Parse through that, digest that already. So again, it starts building, your theory starts building, and your preparation for trial starts building. And then as the evidence comes in, look at it right away. Don't shove it in a folder. Don't keep it on your desk in the pile of evidence to read. Like, even if it's a cursory glance, look through it. Start thinking about the holes in the case and what information you need or what motions you need to file, because information is missing, or now you know that you need access to this piece of information. And like breaking things down step by step for your supervisees will alleviate some of those feelings of stress and overwhelm. And it's something that my direct reports have told me has been really helpful when they're feeling overwhelmed. Is like, how do I do this work so that it's not like the night before trial and I'm cracking open the file for the first time because I forgot that I had trial. We also make like trial lists at least 2 months in advance so that you can start making sure that your motions are filed within a month, at least a month in advance of trial. Those are just little things that we do. And then when in court, another challenge. This is the first time I had to supervise people on the record who are appearing on the record with their clients for the first time, taking real ownership of their cases. And I'm not in the courtroom, being able to physically be next to them, being able to physically walk over and whisper, like, make this argument, don't say this argument, sit down, the judge is with you, stand up, the judge is not with you and needs to say something, all the things. And even just for emotional support, right? Like sometimes supervising attorneys, they have it, they know what they're doing, but why they want you there is just to look back at you in the back of the courtroom for that reassuring nod, like, keep going, you got this, do it. Just being that presence in the courtroom makes such a difference. And it doesn't need to be a supervisor. It can be a colleague, it could be a friend, but like knowing that you're about to go into this really terrible appearance where everyone is against you and you're right, but no one else is going to think your arguments are valid. It's so helpful to have your cheer squad in the back, just like knowing like, we got you. We don't need to say anything. We're showing up, we've got you. How do you replicate that in COVID court? I think one thing that I learned is to appear with my video on. Very rarely do I jump in the record. I could be that supervising attorney who, like, when I want to step in, aggressively puts my camera on and like says something. I don't want to do that. I want to be that reassuring little box for my person to let them know, like, keep going. We can recreate it this way. We also have to find new ways of communicating during COVID court. So encouraging your direct reports to be able to tell the judge, I need a minute to consult with my supervisor off camera. To take that step back, to take that beat, to take that breath. Having your supervisee share their prep materials with you in advance so that you both can be typing in the same document and seeing the same things real time. That's really helpful in hearings where it's like, judge is not feeling these questions, highlight all the questions, don't ask these. Let's move on to this point. Or keep going, or actually follow up with this point. Or sometimes they'll type, I'm stuck. Where do I go? That's been really helpful. Other people, texting works really well because nowadays on laptops, like you can pull up your text right alongside your prep, right alongside the court windows, and that works really well. I also find that now more than ever, if resources allow, co-counseling is really great. And I say co-counseling, not in like the traditional sense of co-counseling, but technology has definitely failed all of us at one point in a court appearance. We froze, we dropped out, we couldn't get in. What we have found is like during very stressful appearances where you're just like, I'm worried about technology failing me. It would be helpful to have like a second person in the room who can see when I drop out to highlight like, hey, we're missing the respondent counsel's attorney. because court will just continue on without you if they don't know that you've dropped off. So having just a buddy who you say, like Caitlin is doing for us today, can you please screen share the evidence for me so that I can just have my like cross questions pulled up and go plugging along with them? Because if I have to do both simultaneously, like screen share, I can't have my prep up. Like, what do I do? That's been something that we've done with our office that helps greatly with troubleshooting. I think also, depending on your comfort, following really challenging court appearances, I have offered to go into our office, which is an option for us. You have to reserve and get permission, but to reserve space in our office, to appear in the office with my supervisee and their client for court, because maybe that is going to be the method that works better. I've also offered my home and my supervisees to come to my home or me go to their home, and we sit side by side to do their trials. That's my comfort. That's not everybody's comfort. Another thing you could try to do, if that is not your level of comfort, is to, again, utilize Zoom meetings to meet with the attorney and the client together, perhaps, to kind of simulate this is what court will look like. There will be many people in a box. So like, let's practice you testifying in front of our little squares so that when you appear in court, it's not the first time you're doing it, and you get more comfortable with the technology and with the court process and how it works. And then most importantly is the emotional health check-ins. I do think on the topic of vicarious trauma and taking on the emotional labor of like what your client's experiencing, it's really important to make the debriefing not optional, but mandatory. And you don't have to label it that. It's just natural to kind of like when you see someone who is taking on a lot of what just happened in an appearance, to check in. How are you? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being like, I want to quit my job, and 10 being like, I can stay on and do this forever. Where do you land? What's your emotional pulse right now? Why do you feel that way? Sometimes they can't name it. In which case, then you can offer, this is what I saw happen. Is that what you were experiencing? Tell me more. Or if you don't feel up for it right now, let's follow up tomorrow. Give yourself some space. Look and check if your supervisee can take a beat, can take the afternoon off, can take even an hour or 2 off to step away and put on their out of office. And you as their supervisor say, I've got you in case any emergencies come up, but I see you're not in court. So can you step away? Can you do that thing that restores you in this time? And I see anything, Caitlin, or shall we go on to the case study, which will be brief?
Yes. So there's nothing comes to mind except just one thing I wanted to add. I saw that Bree is here in the room today, and Bree works in Alameda County out in California as a parent advocate. And I know that something that Bree struggled with in the beginning of virtual court, and I'm not sure if it's still an issue, but parent advocates and social workers were precluded from appearing in court, in virtual court. They weren't permitted to be in the courtroom, to be on video as a support to clients. And I will say in the very beginning of virtual court in New York City, we had similar challenges where the court was very sort of protective about who was allowed into the virtual courtrooms, who was allowed to be on camera. And we have certainly made a lot of strides in that area, and our parent advocates and social workers are able to appear in court on video with their clients, and that has been, I think, a really important part of our practice and our holistic practice. And so, if you're in a jurisdiction where that is not happening, I hope that your leadership is working with all of you together to fight back against that, because the critical importance of clients having a team with them in the appearance in virtual court is as important as it was in court in person. And so I just wanted to mention that because I know that's something that some jurisdictions are encountering, and we would be happy to be a resource to brainstorm if that's coming up. And then I want to just kick it back to Nicole for this next case scenario, and then we'll talk that through.
So you have several supervisees who come to you on a regular basis with case conferencing questions, prep review, etc. One of your supervisees never seeks you out beyond standing meetings that you have scheduled. Is this an issue? If so, how do you approach the issue? I think more than ever, now that we are not in person, this can be problematic in the sense that you don't get it, unlike in-person times where you could like visually look in someone's desk and see like, are you there? Are you working? Are you showing up? Are you present? Now in COVID more than ever, I think it's really important to have those standing meetings, and not standing meetings as lip service to say like we checked in, but really to see who this person is and what they might be dealing with in any given moment. And it may be in these instances that the supervisee is not bringing much to supervision. Doesn't mean that they don't need the support. It may mean they don't know how to ask for the support. It may mean that they're so lost, they don't even know where to begin. It may mean that they're overwhelmed. It may mean that they're checked out of the work and don't really care, and it's just the day-to-day, they're surviving as opposed to thriving. And so I think it really behooves us in those moments to come to supervision with structure. And I think in those moments, structure will kind of uproot maybe some of what's happening for that person. So for example, I've had situations where I'm like, I know you have hearings coming up, so I know that you're not like hunky-dory, everything is okay, I'm happy to be here. And I know that on the last appearance, like you were beat up pretty badly by the judge for standing up for your client. So like thinking about that, let's go through your cases and focus on like the hearings that you have coming up. Let's break down your prep. Where are you? What do you need? Have you talked to the client? Have you set up a prep time with your client? You know? And I don't think it comes off as micromanaging, because hearing myself, I could see like maybe that would be like a fear of like, well, now I'm micromanaging my supervisee. But it, depending on how you phrase it, like I was thinking today, maybe we can do supervision this way. How do you feel about that? You know, and I've done that a few times when I felt like people are so in their moment of crisis that they come to supervision. They're like, I didn't do an agenda today, you know? And it's like, because we're meeting weekly, I have a really good sense of your caseload, and I know what's going on. So we haven't actually talked about your stale cases in a while. The ones that like are not the squeaky wheel, that are kind of at the bottom of your to-do list because maybe the kids are home, or like maybe you don't have contact with them. Like, let's use this time to check in on those, and kind of being creative about like, what holes am I seeing? Or maybe I'm not seeing any holes, but we haven't talked about this topic in a long time. So how about we revisit this? And when you do it enough, I think sometimes it gives your direct reports an idea of like how maybe they can be utilizing the space and time in a way that serves them. And it may be like, I'm talking about topics that like they have fully mastered and handled, and they're going to get annoyed because they're going to be like, I don't want to talk about this with Nicole. So let me come with new ideas.
I want to invite Noemi or Maya if you have anything to add to Nicole's reflection on this scenario, or anything that Nicole has shared. And while you're thinking about that, I just want to elevate Jill's comments here. So Jill works in Colorado, and it's a contract only model. So there's not the same sort of supervision structure, but mentions that if she hears about a difficult case from a colleague via the attorney listserv or an attorney or social worker, she'll call up and say, hey, how are you? I heard this rough thing happened. How can I or we support you? And it creates an environment where team members can flag situations and difficult cases without, that feeling of being ratted out, a support call. So just kind of being really attuned, it sounds like, and listening for what people might be struggling with, even if what they're describing is this difficult case where they may be looking for particular advice. So I'll go to you, Maya, and then Noemi, if there's any other kind of thoughts on this topic or this scenario.
Yes. So what jumps out at me at this scenario is I suppose mine goes to the worst case. My mind goes to the worst case scenarios. I've got a supervisee who's really with a mental health issue, or a substance issue, or a domestic violence issue, because just as you are aware, some of the unfortunate mental health adverse events because of quarantine and COVID life, let's call it COVID life, is that we have absolutely seen an increase in anxiety and depressive disorders, seen a significant increase in alcohol and substance use, as well as an increase in domestic violence. And so, one worries that silence means something really catastrophic for the person. And so with that in mind, all you can do is inquire about how things are going. Are things going at home? Beyond that, all you can really do, I recognize all you can do is create a space where you hope that people can flag issues. And maybe what you might say is, if there's any way that I can be helpful. So you keep that door open. And I recognize, because we've had this occur in my context as well, in my workplace as well. You can ask those questions. You can have strong concerns and strong suspicions that something terrible at home is happening, and people may not be willing to take you up on the offer of support or help, or may not be comfortable discussing it. I think that's sort of inevitable. But I always keep that in the back of my mind with these big silences in COVID time.
And for me, what I've been able to use is just group chats. We have like a WhatsApp group chat, the group that I supervise, and it's very active every single day. I think it was like we've calmed down a little bit with the chatting, but definitely in the beginning of the pandemic, it was like our own personal support, I think, group for each other. And also, something that I would say, while keeping boundaries in place, for me, I also felt like I had to model as well if I was struggling, and being able to voice that and say like, I'm not in a good space right now or whatever. I think to be able to show vulnerability, which then will allow my supervisors to feel some level of comfort in expressing what they're also maybe going through. So for me, the active chat group has been the lifesaver during this time.
Thank you so much to all of you. It sounds like others are agreeing with you, Noemi. Microsoft Team chats have been useful. I know we've all mastered every platform under the sun and found what works for us and for our teams. And so it sounds like that's working across the board. Before, or as I kind of transition into your section, Maya, I wonder if one of the comments here in the chat and also the question is a good lead in. So what do you do when you have one or two attorneys who don't reach out regularly, but you're providing supervision for 13 attorneys who have between 130 and 240 cases each? The silent wheel doesn't get any oil. And it's not a good thing, because that silence may speak volumes, but it can be the nature of things, at least for me. And I think that comment, we kind of come into this conversation recognizing that, as Nicole mentioned, our caseloads, we have been able to get down to in the 60s for our attorney colleagues and in the 50s for social workers and advocates. And our supervisory ratios are much lower than what I know many of you across the country are dealing with. And so it goes to the question too of that's in the question category. Caseloads are really high, 150 per attorney, and one attorney leaves every 44 days. And I think that is an intense reality for many of our colleagues across the country. Maya is going to be talking a little bit about, kind of burnout and recognizing all of that. But it's real. The resources are different in different places. One, I would just underscore Nicole's section where she talked about transparency. I was at Bronx Defenders when caseloads were 100 and more actually than 100. And one thing that felt important to us and is, even if you can't get caseloads down, which we recognize as money doesn't grow on trees, you can't create resources where they don't exist, but being transparent about what you are doing to advocate for more resources, to recognize that 240 cases, 240 parents, that is too much. No one can do that. No one can represent that many people to the ability that we want to. And so just being honest about that, being transparent about that, I think was helpful in our practice. That is something that we saw our leaders do, let us know what they were doing to advocate for more resources, and recognizing that it is just too much work to manage, and being honest about that. And with that, I'll kick it to you, Maya, for comments on those questions and real issues that people are dealing with, and a lead into your section.
was busy just typing a reply there. I was just thinking about this question. And let me just begin by answering that question about what do you do about those silent people when everybody, including you, are so busy. And what I was going to say is, as you're trying to figure out, is that person in trouble? If you've had the advantage of working with them pre-COVID and you have a sense of what their baseline style is, I'm always worried about changes in functioning. Do I see something really different about what's happening now versus beyond all these new events? The other thing I would say is that working from home has made me really appreciate how much actually happens literally in the workspace. A moment of distress gets dissipated because somebody just wanders down the hall and has a casual conversation with a coworker, even if they don't know that case, even if they don't know that particular discipline. Whereas when something unfortunate happens while we're all working from home, then it's just the professional sitting in their spare bedroom or closet or bathroom or whatever the work is getting done, and it can make people feel really bereft. So I certainly appreciate the challenge of the silent supervisee, and we'll just keep underscoring the idea of returning to check-ins whenever possible. Okay, and remember, each check-in does not need to be the length of time that it might have been in person. In fact, I think that all interactions tend to get shorter on video. It's more bearable at this point, so just keep that in mind, which is the segue perhaps to this. Caitlin, would you mind flipping it to the next slide? Thank you. So I think these work trainings and small group trainings that we've done at the Bronx Defenders in the last few years around supervision have been the most sort of interesting and sort of unexpected. We've done trainings by practice area, how challenges of supervision and group and brainstormed about what those issues are. And we've also done different trainings for people at different levels of experience of being a supervisor. So junior supervisors versus more experienced supervisors, in which the critical difference might be people's own comfort about being a supervisor and having to manage both up and down, and also thinking about their own, particularly at the junior stages, people can find it really challenging to take on some sort of mantle of authority and responsibility, and that can be a learning curve for people. But just thinking about the kinds of questions that come to me during these supervisor trainings, I think they fall into three main categories. And I want to just name them and then invite questions, and we can talk about the topics that animate you the most. So the three main categories of that come my way are: how do we do decision making with clients who live with major mental illness? Very often the questions around how do I work with somebody who's floridly psychotic or who's floridly manic, and who either might not be present or consistent, or whose opinions change all the time. And I think we've tried to address that by doing a lot of education around specific mental illnesses. What does it mean to have schizophrenia, including perhaps drawing attention to some of the symptoms that might sort of make the interaction with the supervisor or supervisee very challenging. For example, the negative symptoms around schizophrenia, how that can impede concentration and motivation, etc. So I think doing deep dives into thinking about mental illness has been helpful. And also helping people manage their expectations about what can get done with a client in a particular moment if they're particularly unwell or symptomatic. I think sometimes supervisees feel like if they only knew the right thing to say or the perfect thing to say, they could unlock that entire relationship with somebody who is unwell and it will all go smoothly. And so I think we do a lot of education about what the realistic expectations are for working with somebody who's unwell. Sort of second category of questions is: how do we manage countertransference with a client or a supervisee? And countertransference is obviously a clinical term that can capture a lot of ideas, but really is meant to capture the idea that we may not always like the people that we're working with, whether it's a colleague or a client. We may find them challenging, we may find them unpleasant, maybe they say disruptive things that really get under our skin. And I think just naming that as a challenge has been incredibly helpful, because often our supervisees feel like they aren't allowed to have opinions or feelings or responses to the people that they're working with. And so by creating some space to acknowledge that there can be challenges, I think has opened people up to being able to problem solve what they can do that makes the relationship at least professional or effective, even if it might not be their favorite one. And of course, in the last year, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to manage overwhelm. Um, manage overwhelm in supervisees while managing one's own. And there's so much there because everybody has been struggling. Everybody has been extending themselves in a number of ways. And in fact, depending on the office, people may have even found themselves being asked to extend themselves. And certainly I can understand that at the beginning of COVID, I come back to this idea all the time. We thought it might be 3 months or 4 months, and now it has become a year. And I think that we need to be attentive to the idea that no one expected to have to extend themselves in any number of ways for this length of time, and everybody's reservoirs of coping and adaptive skills have been drained. And I think naming that is helpful. Thinking about how to rotate responsibilities, how to rotate the backup responsibilities is absolutely critical. You can't assume that anybody has unlimited emotional resources and technical resources to do the work and the emotional work. So naming that is helpful. And I would also sort of note that one of the challenges around overwhelm is that I think there are important generational, what I'm going to characterize as generational differences which are making their way into the workplace. That perhaps some of our younger hires are going to have different expectations about what kinds of emotional support they might get in the work or what they might ask from their supervisors. And that might be really challenging for more experienced supervisors who have very different styles of supervision or who themselves had been modeled very different styles of engagement with work. So I wanted to name that, and we're going to do a case in which all these issues are going to come up more. But those are the main categories of questions that have come my way. I'm very curious to hear what the other panelists think about this, and you as well.
So Maya, one thing might be worth touching on now before going into the case scenario is Rick's comment from very early on when we first gathered about vicarious trauma. I'm finding that newer defense teams empathize so deeply with the clients that when things don't go well, it's soul crushing. How do you encourage compassion in the work without falling into empathetic distress? I just want to say hi to Rick. It's been a while. Rick used to be in New York City, and it's nice to see you here. And I appreciate that question so much. I think it speaks to all of us very much. So I'll kick it back to you, Maya, and then others for comments on it.
Yes, thank you for that question. So there's never a single intervention to these challenges. Let me name some of the interventions that we've done. We talk a lot about self-care, developing resilience, and try to provide a lot of education around the ways in which these syndromes can manifest at work. Because I think that a lot of people come into this work some people will come into this work without having a psychological vocabulary. They won't recognize the psychological impact of the work on them. They don't know what the potential red flags are. So I think education is absolutely critical. And as part of that, I think creating a culture in which psychological awareness and skill is as much a part of the job as whatever technical piece of the job that you're doing, I think has been really important. So I think giving people the language to name what's happening to them and to recognize the early manifestations is really critical. I think some of the most important parts of the resilience workshops and trainings that we do has been to encourage people to remember that their world, their life and their world ought to include things beyond their work, that people's identities are very, that people absolutely take great pride in their professional identity, but then sometimes, especially when people are younger and really throwing themselves into their work, their lens can get narrowed. And we talk a lot about the importance of keeping that lens broad and having kind of engage as many aspects in their life as they can, making sure they don't lose track of old friends, making sure that they create time outside of work, doing non-work things, doing things that might even be frivolous and fun. And for those of you who have done work and trainings around resilience and self-care, you'll know that those are the basics. But sometimes we just have to keep coming back to the basics and naming the basics for our supervisees. So I think, I remember my last comment is I remember very early on in one of the trainings, we talked about, do you feel like you're allowed to have fun outside of work? And the room just went silent because people had so much guilt about taking time away from themselves. And that turned out to be a very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Maya. Noemi or Nicole, anything to add before we move into the case scenario?
I would just add, and I think that this is also a longer conversation for a different workshop, but when I think about vicarious trauma, when I just think about the energy that I once felt when we were in person, was some of the questions that I would question was just the white fragility that was coming up and this guilt. Also, just thinking about and honoring the resilience of our clients, and that they don't always need us as much as we think that they need us, right? So, addressing just like the feeling and putting language to it, which is something that I often felt was what I was doing in supervision, not only with my supervisees, but I just think, having anyone come in to my office and sitting down, I often joked about me being able to provide the pro bono EAP services internally, because it's exactly like I felt what was like needed at times. And honoring the fact that I believe that I have the skill set to address some of this, not only with clients, but also with colleagues that are experiencing the vicarious trauma, and helping them connect the dots to see why that's happening. So that's my response.
Thank you, Noemi. Nicole, anything to add?
In the chat.
Hopping in the chat, affirming that Noemi has a couch in her office that is definitely a therapy couch, more than anything. And yes, it's a great use. Our social work colleagues often, when we do trainings for new attorneys in our office, will say, we are not your therapists. We are not. That is not our primary role. But in the end, as Noemi mentioned, we do have clinical skills and training that often that we have the opportunity to use in the work, and that is the work with our clients as well as in the work with our colleagues. And so we know that and bring our that expertise to bear on our interdisciplinary teams in supervision. I know it's hard because we only have 4 minutes left. We haven't quite gotten to this last scenario, but really the kind of content of the scenario is about managing overwhelm, high volumes, and how to kind of manage all of that. And so I don't know if Maya, you had anything else you wanted to add. Otherwise, I'll maybe elevate a couple of these comments.
I wanted to sort of comment on Noemi's role, sort of unspoken de facto role about providing support. But I just want to name that I've certainly worked with offices where the social workers in those offices felt like that the role of providing support has become a burden rather than something that happens organically and is enjoyable for them. And so I think sometimes there can that role blurring between supervision, case management support, and therapy for people can become really complicated. So I just wanted to name that. I have complete confidence that Noemi will draw the line when she needs to, but not everybody does. And I think sometimes supervisees and attorneys might need a little bit of modeling or education about where that line is. We had a case that sort of addressed a number of things, some sort of burnout, and I would have addressed sort of burnout and sort of generational differences, which I think are going to come into play more and more in the office. In fact, it was so rich, I'm sort of struggling to think about what we haven't named yet. I think I'll just stop my comments there and let Caitlin elevate whatever is coming up in the chat, because the chat seems to have gotten very busy.
I just wanted to kind of note Jill's comments earlier. I have found our attorneys' enjoyment of the work increases exponentially when they have social workers or parent advocates on their teams regularly. So not just once in a while, but they are working regularly on an interdisciplinary team. Those attorneys can do the work harder and longer from my perspective. I wonder, Nicole, as the attorney on the panel, whether that resonates with you and in the work of your supervision of your attorney colleagues.
Completely. I also feel like it feels like you have an ally in the work with you, especially like, let's be real, our clients are not always the most easy people to work with. So sometimes just having another perspective, another person to bounce ideas off of, another person to see the holes and maybe how you're discussing a case with your client and how maybe they're seeing that the client is receiving or not receiving the information and pivoting and providing their insight. I just think it's like, it's a team. It makes you feel like you have a team. It's like internal built-in support. So why wouldn't you do it if it's available to you? Why wouldn't you do it on every case?
Thank you, Nicole. And we have reached the end of our time together. We could talk for hours more, but very much appreciate you all choosing to be with us here today. We're ending with this quote about mentorship, supervising, leading, managing, and even just doing the work. It is all about building others and mentoring. This quote from Oprah Winfrey about mentoring. A mentor is someone who allows you to see the higher part of yourself when sometimes it becomes hidden to your own view. And so we appreciate all of the work you all as supervisors and leaders and managers have done and continue to do to lift up and build up what sometimes is hidden when the work is so overwhelming and crushing. And so thank you all for being here. We'll add these slides to the files so that you can reference these materials later on. Thank you to Nicole and Noemi and Maya for sharing your wisdom with us today. And thank you all for being here. Take good care.
To see you in the chat, Haley.